The 4x4 Podcast, episode 137.
You're listening to the 4x4 Podcast, the podcast all about four-wheeling, overlanding, off-road racing, and the outdoor lifestyle. We talk about news, tips and tricks, answer your questions, and interview big and little names in the off-roading world. So whether your rig is busted and you're in the shop wrenching on it, or you're on your way to the trail, join us and we'll keep you plugged in on topics to help you get away. Here are your hosts, Dan, Craig, and Rich.
Well, hello. This is just Dan this time. Still don't have the entire crew back together, but I do have a really special interview that I want to share with you. And this is with Jake Coleman from the Dirty Dooner podcast. And the reason I want to get this one released to you is because it's a really good crossover type of show. So it's not just me interviewing Jake. It's also Jake interviewing me. Really cool crossover. And obviously, the Dirty Dooner show covers a lot of things that we don't really cover as much on the 4x4 podcast. We don't have a lot of experience racing around in the desert, or at least Rich and I don't. Craig has some experience there. But this is really cool just to see how much overlap there is. It seems like there's more similarities than there are differences between the dune off-roading scene and what we typically talk about with rock crawling and overlanding and things like that. Just want to get this out as soon as possible. So be sure after you listen to this episode of the 4x4 podcast, head over to wherever you subscribe to podcasts and look up the Dirty Dooner podcast, or go to the show notes here, the 4x4podcast.com/137. And I will have links taking you directly to where you can subscribe to the Dirty Dooner show and check them out on all of those social media things. So before we jump to that interview, just want to remind you, we are a part of the 4x4 radio network. And you can subscribe to the Jeep Talk Show, learn everything Jeeps. The Center Steer podcast talks about everything Land Rover. And, of course, Trail Chasers there. Finally got a chance to meet up with Cody. We went off-roading in Big Bear, and I'm sure that'll be talked about on a future show as well. And lastly, there's On the Trail with Kevin and Scott, off-roading way down in Florida. Like, I don't even know what kind of off-roading there is to do in Florida. We need to get Kevin and or Scott on the 4x4 podcast sometime and let you know how that's going.
You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
All right, so tonight, Jake Coleman here. We've got Dan Cole from the 4x4 podcast on the other side of the computer, on the other side of the phone, whatever we want to call it these days.
Yeah, the other side of the internets.
I'm glad we're able to link up. We kind of talked about this in the pre-show. I'm glad we're able to link up. I feel like there's a lot of things, Dan, that our shows share, but a lot of differences.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of one of the things so the 4x4 podcast, I guess to give some background to everybody that is a Dirty Dooner show listener, is the 4x4 podcast covers everything off-roading. I just assume whoever's listening to the 4x4 podcast is generally just like me and has the same interests. So if I'm interested in it, then I'll talk about it. So that ranges everything from high-speed desert off-roading to overlanding to rock crawling, the King of the Hammers type stuff, to just anybody doing something cool in the off-road world. So I cover a wide range of things. So
I think you get out there and you cover more of a wide range than I do for sure. I was listening actually to your guys's. I had started it, but I was finishing the Sand Sport Super show that you and your co-host kind of put together.
Yeah.
And I felt like such a jerk. I was listening to it last night as me and Dan were kind of messaging back and forth, and I was laughing at you guys because of some of the stuff that it's just a different world, different time and a place in a different world. I focus mostly for your listeners. I focus on mainly recreational off-road. Mainly desert and dunes. I haven't really gotten into the Jeep side of things. I did do King of the Hammers this past year, which was a kick in the pants. I mean, It was crazy.
Did you actually get to race in it, or were you just spectating?
No, so actually, that kind of an interesting thing, I guess, is so Buggy Whip, which is the brightest, most durable whip out there. They had a booth at King of the Hammers, so they were actually vending, and they invited me out. They're one of my sponsors, and so I kind of just went out and hung out with their sponsored racers and kind of got to know them and spent time around there. So no racing. I don't think I'll ever race that. It's terrifying.
Oh yeah, those guys are just nuts. You've got to have a purpose-built rig that you don't mind having completely trashed and never using again. Just wad it up and chalk it up to a really expensive good time that happens once. I don't know how those trucks survive multiple races. It's unbelievable.
Hours and hours and hours of prep. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of and that's what's crazy is King of the Hammers. I mean, that's the big race here in the States for that type of racing, Ultra 4 racing, but they've got like King of Britain, King of Portugal. They're all over the world.
Yeah. And all of those have a different flavor just because of the terrain that they're going through.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. The King of the Hammers is on my list of things to do this year. However, my work schedule is not going to permit me to be there for the actual big-time races. So I'll be there for some of the pre-running and just check things out, or at least I hope to anyways. You know, my schedule is changes rapidly. So I guess for a little bit of background for your audience to get to know me, I am active duty Army, currently stationed down here in Southern California. But since I've been doing this show, I started it while I was stationed in South Korea, and then I moved to upstate New York, and from there I went to like the Kansas City, Kansas area, and then up to Alaska for a couple years, and here I am in Southern California. So, you know, just by the nature of where I am, the type of off-roading that I get to do has varied widely. So this is being in Southern California and with sand, it's all pretty new to me, the sand driving. So it's very cool to try and learn all of that. So,
now, Dan, where are you originally from?
So I grew up in Colorado. So I did a lot of just trails and rock crawling type stuff there. But I also helped work on my grandparents' farm in Oklahoma. So I grew up off-roading. I just didn't know it was off-roading. It was just working stuff. And turns out I really enjoyed driving. And it's kind of, once I got my first Jeep and kind of got a little bit older, I did less backpacking. And I still wanted to do that kind of thing. And it turns out it's a lot easier to pile some stuff in a vehicle that can go anywhere than it is carrying a backpack that goes anywhere.
Definitely.
So, yeah, it's just kind of transformed from there. But
and that's kind of wild because, you know, as like with me, I don't think I realize how blessed I am, blessed or, you know, cursed, whatever, to live in Arizona where, you know, we're far enough away from the craziness of Southern California and the lifestyle of Southern California, but we still got a lot of off-roading and a lot of motorsports at our disposal and, you know, within a couple hours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I did the Mojave Road recently, we dipped over into Nevada and kind of saw just the similar thing that you're talking about. Like, it's a very big off-roading presence. You see side-by-sides and ATVs running around on the city streets, whereas I don't think you'll ever see that in California. That was the kind of thing that I was used to in Alaska, but that's because Alaska is anything goes. You take a snow machine down the middle of the highway, and that's no big deal. But
well, how did you decide that you wanted to do a podcast? And I guess how'd you end up with co-hosts? I want to hear, and I think the Dirty Tuner listeners as well would kind of want to hear, you know, the 4x4 podcast from the beginning. They've got a few more shows under the belt than I do. So
I started the show back in 2011. Like I said, while I was stationed in South Korea, and I did not have my Jeep with me, and I was feeling some serious withdrawals because I was there for 3 years, and my Jeep sat at my dad's house in Colorado, and he went off-roading without me in my Jeep. So my Jeep got to have that experience, but I didn't, and so I felt like there was got to be some way I can stay involved in off-roading. There wasn't really any off-roading podcasts. There was the back then it was the XJ Talk Show, and I got really into that because I do drive a Jeep Cherokee, which is like the chassis name is the XJ.
Yeah.
But the host there, Tony, he was not really into off-roading per se. He lives in Houston, Texas, and he built his Jeep as a hurricane survival type of vehicle to get his family out of harm's way. So there was no off-roading podcast that I could find at that time. And I was really into geocaching, and I was friends with the geocaching podcast host. And he said, you should start one. I told him I have no idea how, but he knew the technical side of how to start a podcast. And, podcasting in 2011 is very different than it is here in 2018. But he showed me all the technical stuff on how to do it. I knew how to edit audio, but I didn't know how to build a website, how to get it up there, and do all the nerdy bits on the backside. But once I figured it out, it kind of took off from there. And I think I did the first episode by myself, and it was completely scripted, and I just read the script, and it was horrible. So nobody should ever go back to episode 1 and listen to it because it's awful. But then I had my brother. He came on as a co-host for a while. The challenge was that he was really into like rally and some autocross type stuff, less so than off-roading. So his stay as a co-host was fairly short. And then one of the listeners, he wrote in and we did a quick interview and seemed like a good fit at the time. And so Craig Pickenich, my co-host who we were talking about, we finally got to meet at the Sandsport Super Show. But we had done probably 5 or 6 years at that point of him being a co-host, and we had never actually met face to face. So
that is wild.
Yeah,
that is super wild.
Yeah, and Rich is the other host or co-host. He lives in Lawrence, Kansas, and same thing. He was a listener, came on the show to help out, to fill in a brief gap in co-host coverage, and then we just kept him on. But then when I moved to Kansas City, that's just like 45 minutes from Lawrence, and so we got to hang out a couple times. So that was good. Now I've officially met everybody in the 4x4 podcast LLC. So it actually, it turned out that I'd really never expected the 4x4 podcast to grow to where it is now. But it got to the point where I said, I should probably do something for legal protections because it's taken off so big. And so the 4x4 podcast is now a full-blown business with all of the benefits of that, which has allowed me to really kind of expand the show in ways that I really didn't expect before. So it's been a good time. I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Well, and that's wild too, because 2011, I mean, I'm fairly young, but 2011, podcasts weren't really big then.
Yeah.
Not like they are now.
No. Which is been kind of to my benefit, being in there and established in the off-roading community for so long. It is not terribly uncommon for me to run into somebody just in the wild and they say, "Oh, hey, I listen to your show." And then it becomes a weird conversation where they know everything about me and I've just met them for the first time. But
well, it's kind of crazy too, because I have a similar story. My listeners kind of know this, but so I worked for Boeing on the Apache helicopters for 6 years. That's what I did.
Okay.
Just recently had a career change, but I used to listen to podcasts every day. And some mostly automotive podcasts. Always been into like old Chevy trucks, so I listened to a show, C10 Talk. Ronnie is local here in the Phoenix area, and then I also used to listen to the Jim Beaver Show.
Oh yeah.
And so when I was thinking about starting a podcast, I just randomly sent both of them a message. I said, "Look, what's your take on this? I never want people to think like." I didn't want Jim especially to think that I was competing, because Jim's got such a good thing going on and he's got, big time sponsors and supporters. He makes a living doing it. Yeah. And Jim said, "Dude, I love it. Go for it. I'll help you with whatever you need." And that was kind of like, whoa, like he really doesn't care. And then also Ronnie from C10 Talk, who is another show that's up there with the 4x4 podcast, usually in rankings. He was kind of had the same thing. He's like, the only advice I have for you, he's like, just start doing it. Just start recording, figure it out.
Yep. That's great advice. And Jim Beaver is awesome. The fact that he's got a great understanding that there's room in the podcast space for everybody because not everybody has the same interests. And I totally acknowledge that too. Like, I know that, I probably offend a bunch of people. I rub some people the wrong way, but there's other people who we totally click. Like, we're just, of the same brain. So that's a great thing about off-roading is that it's such a broad spectrum of interests and ways of doing things that there's really room for everybody. And what's that phrase? The high tides rise all boats. Like, podcast is going to continue to become more popular, I think. And, the way like the Jeep brand is expanding, just blowing up, there's, you see all kinds of different types of Jeeps being built. So there's probably all kinds of different Jeep types of podcasts that should be out there. And that's kind of how it's going.
And definitely. I mean, it's wild to see. And I think, as far as like Jeep brands expanding and stuff like that, I think even further, like, I think there'll be a point in time where with our economy that we're seeing today, I think that, the disciplines will get closer together. Like people like me, a Dooner and a Desert, a Go Fast guy. I went to King of the Hammers like we talked about.
Yep.
I'd like to attend some other events that maybe your listeners might be interested in, but I've never even thought to go to.
Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right about the crossover thing. Just today I was looking at the Dakar Rally stuff is coming up. And, I've been disappointed to see Robbie Gordon kind of run off the international stage for off-roading. BJ Baldwin had a very short stint there and, didn't last long. But now I just happen to see that Casey Curry, who, he's crushing it in everything that he touches. He's going to be competing in the Dakar Rally in the side-by-side class this year. And the fact that there is a side-by-side class in the Dakar Rally that's mind-blowing.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's something I got to laugh at when I was listening to your guys' Sand Sport Super Show. I can't remember which one of your co-hosts, but they made the comment like, what are these things? Like, these side-by-sides things, they're everywhere. They've got big stereos. I just had to laugh because, dude, that's our jam out here.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the Dune and Desert World, like, you'll have I've known people that have been off-roading for 20, 25 plus years that have had massive $100,000 buggies that are selling them to buy a side-by-side.
Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've never had a chance to ride in a sand rail, but I think that'd be a good time. The fact that some of those things have like floors you can see through so you can steer while you're doing a wheelie, I need to be a part of that. I need that in my life.
It looks like we're going to have you come out to Glamis, and my sand rail in specific, it's got holes in the floor. You'd like that.
See,
one.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. I was just talking to somebody the other day about going down to Glamis. That's on another place on my bucket list. Haven't been there. Haven't been to Pismo. So that's a great thing is that I get to move around the world and see the different places on somebody else's dime. The Army's paying for me to go to these places. So it's perfect. Yeah,
that is a really cool thing. Something I kind of I envy. But the next best thing for me when I was younger was obviously working for a military contractor, and that's kind of out of the picture. But I think it's very cool and honorable that that's what you're doing, and you've made a life out of that, and also involved the 4x4 podcast with that life.
Yeah. There's been some shows. I produced a couple shows while I was in Afghanistan, and there were some interruptions of some weird noises at times. But I think that really kind of highlights the fact that off-roading is a part of my life, and it's going with me everywhere. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So very cool. So you mentioned the sand rail. What other kind of things that are you guys driving over there on the Dirty Dooner show?
So the biggest worlds that I'm kind of a part of, and not just driving, but something you guys kind of brought up in your talks about the Sand Sport Super Show was the toy hauler world. How a lot of you guys hadn't experienced with the toy hauler, the big trailers with the big door on the back.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge part of that world because that's actually what I do for a living now.
Oh.
I started the Dirty Dooner show. Let's see, it was about 18 months ago. And within 6 months, I had an RV dealership that came to me and said, hey, we'd like to support you. We'd like to sponsor you. And my family's always been a truck family, a trailer family. Me and my wife, before when we had our first kid, we had a trailer, and now we're on our fourth trailer. And so toy haulers are a big thing, especially on the West Coast. And I know like around the country, they're not that big of a thing. So that's kind of that. We've got the sandrails, and then we've got the side-by-sides, and most toy haulers now are built to fit a side-by-side of some sort in the back of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been very close to picking one up a couple times. So that's something that's really popular in Alaska because it makes a great spot to, you park it and you've got base camp to go salmon fishing, or you can roll your quads out to go just hunting. Or in the wintertime, if you've got it winterized or at least run it dry, you can use it with the snow machines piled in the back and be able to have a base camp place to warm up and camp out. So those are really cool. I know my wife is pretty sold on that. It probably won't be long until she's tired of staying in the rooftop tent and she's ready for something more comfortable. So,
well, now you know a guy.
Yeah. So, and I'll have to find out where it is that you're at down in Arizona. You said, yeah. My wife's got
we're in the
some
Phoenix area. So.
Oh, well, this is working out already. My wife's got family in Mesa, so next time we go visit, we may have to come by and pay you a visit.
And Mesa is actually where I've lived my whole life, minus a few years here and there. But I'm a Mesa native, which is in the Phoenix area, kind of East Valley area. But I live 10 minutes from desert. I live 15 minutes from water to the lake. I mean, it's a good lifestyle for raising kids out here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's the unbearable heat. At least what I considered unbearable heat at the time. So, funny story. I went and visited my wife's grandparents one time, and we went out on the lake there, and I think it was like 118. And I thought, this is unbelievable. I don't know how I'm going to bear this for any amount of time. But then shortly after that, I found myself in Kuwait and on into Iraq, where it was like 128. And I thought for sure my brain was just going to melt. So, and now here I am in Southern California in the Mojave Desert, again, baking in the heat. So.
Well, Mojave Desert's beautiful, though, and, I'm not sure how long you're stationed there. I think one of our first conversations, you said, are you in Barstow? Is that where you're at?
Yeah, outside the Barstow area, which there's a ton of off-roading going on here.
Yeah.
There's not much else, actually.
Yeah.
Nothing in Barstow.
I had a guest a few weeks ago on my show who is from Barstow, and, that's all he knows. He's never really been out of Barstow. Got a pre-runner, which is another off-road vehicle. I guess I should throw that into the sandrail and the side-by-side, world. We do pre-runners on the West Coast too, and in Arizona and in California. So.
Yeah, that's not something you see anywhere on the East Coast. Definitely don't see any pre-runners in Alaska. But I had the opportunity a couple years ago to go co-drive in the Baja 1000 with Team Homemade Motorsports and Brandon Walsh. And we went to do our pre-running in a Ford Raptor, and that was the first time I'd been in a Ford Raptor. And I felt like we were, going through the terrain pretty quick, but not realizing the race truck was going to be going at least twice that speed through that same terrain. So that was a great time and really kind of opened my eyes to what's actually possible and what those, a fully race prepped truck is capable of. It's amazing.
It is. They're amazing machines, and just continuing to get more and more amazing. Kind of like Jeeps, the capabilities of a Jeep. I can't believe what the capabilities are of a Jeep, even compared to 10 years ago. Yeah,
it's really phenomenal. But I guess that's some of the benefit with the side-by-sides. The Jeeps are typically daily drivers, and people are trying to drive with a lot of finesse, but nobody's driving a side-by-side to work. So they're really kind of going after it with a little more gusto, and it's a little more exciting. And the price seems to be coming down, but at the same time, it's expanding, I guess, in both directions. When I saw some of those side-by-sides going for $70,000, $80,000, that was mind-blowing. So I suspect those are going pretty fast and being able to survive and do it repeatedly.
Yeah, and what's funny is, lot of times with the $70,000-$80,000 builds, it's not even so much the going fast or the being able to soak it up. It's that they jump up in price so much when you add and this was another thing you guys talked about, when you add the stereos, when you add all the bolt-on accessories, the billet accessories. And unfortunately, this scene in this world that I'm kind of a part of, and you're a part of it too, is that's what people are kind of drawn to, is like what looks the best.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean it's performing the best, but it looks good while it's sitting there blaring the stereo.
Definitely. Like with me. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, we've got a toy hauler that is sponsored by Rolly White RV, the dealership that I now work for. And it's wrapped. It started out as a brand new toy hauler with brand new graphics. We ripped them off and we vinyl wrapped the whole thing, a 43-foot toy hauler. And that was mainly for promotion reason, but also just the look of it. We wanted it to be loud going down the road. We wanted it to be bright.
The rolling billboard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense. So, I mean, that's the reason I've got, a giant sticker for the 4x4 podcast on the side windows of my Jeep. Yes. Everybody recognizes the Jeep. They're like, oh, hey, you're the guy with the Jeep. Yep, that's me. So,
I want to talk a little about overlanding. You brought it up a few times. I don't understand it. What is overlanding?
Well, so it's funny you mentioned that because I kind of ride the fence on both sides. So I've talked to some folks who are overlanding is their life. Like they are full-time on the road, traveling the world, seeing the sights. But it seems like the mainstream definition of overlanding now is, it's a fancy car camping, really. So, I mean, there's lots of definitions out there, and I'm not gonna tell somebody that they're right or wrong on it. But really, it's somewhere between car camping and full-time living on the road, traveling the world. Somewhere in there is the right answer. So
I mean, overlanding is technically taking it's like backpacking with a vehicle.
Yeah, I think it boils down to just vehicle dependent travel. So everything that you have is inside the vehicle, which that kind of ranges. You see a lot of people using trailers of some size. I built a trailer for my family because I wanted to be able to set up camp and then go do something and then come back. I don't want to have to collapse the entire campsite and vacate every time I want to go do something fun or just go to a store or go to dinner somewhere. I'm not always out in the middle of nowhere cooking dinner. Sometimes we're near a town and want to go sample some of the local flavor. So having the trailer set up kind of allows us to have that flexibility. But it also allows me to go off into north of the Arctic Circle where there is nothing and go fishing and off-roading and exploring and just having a good time with family. And still be comfortable and have a moderate amount of safety. I'm not, surrounded by all the wild animals. Not like a rooftop tent is going to save you from a bear attack or anything, but, it makes you feel a little better, I guess.
Well, and I was at an expo last weekend in Lake Havasu City, and it amazes me to see these rooftop tents and even these little campers that are kind of I say this in quotation marks, overland campers.
Yeah.
It amazes me to see, the capabilities of them and the equipment and how well some of them are built. Even these rooftop tents, how well some of them are built.
Yeah. And they are expensive. Or at least they can be expensive. But if you're going to go camping a lot, then it kind of makes it worth it because you want to have something comfortable where you can get a good night's sleep. But like my trailer, I've pulled it with my Jeep down the Denali Highway and some of the side roads, down ATV-sized trails, and parked in areas that just inaccessible unless you've got a side-by-side or an ATV. And if you have that, you're still not going to get into it with all the creature comforts that I've got with us. All the onboard running water. I've got a camp shower with hot water, full kitchen, and a mattress that's actually comfortable to sleep on. So, and being able to pull that down any trail, anything I can get my Jeep through, I can likely get that trailer through. Even though I built it myself, very low cost compared to some of those other trailers on the market. But I think it just shows what's possible if you really know what you're doing or have some good coaching and put some sweat equity into it.
Well, at this point, you're really making me look like a wuss because we're extremely blessed to have the camper toy hauler that we have. But I guess, according to what you're talking about, I haven't been camping in years.
Well, so you don't really have to. If you're going out in the desert, you don't have to stuff it down a tiny little trail, or at least that's what my understanding of the desert until I got here to the Mojave. Turns out the trails in the Mojave are just as tiny as anywhere else. So, yeah. Just recently I did the Mojave Road, and I still got to release that interview. My cousin and I did. My whole family and my cousin came, and we took a full-size truck and pulled that trailer and had a great time. There's no way you could get a 43-foot toy hauler down that trail, though. You would have to park it at certain areas, go run a section of the trail, come back, pick up the trailer, and move to the next, or have your support crew move it forward for you. All like Dakar Rally or something.
Yeah. I have to have my chase crew move it along.
So. Yeah. Pick you up at the next 80 miles down the trail.
Well, it's weird and it's interesting. You know, there's we're obviously from two different disciplines, but you know, there's a lot of similarities.
Oh,
and I like that. I really like that, and it just goes to show. This is going to sound kind of cheesy, but it goes to show that like off-roading is off-roading.
Yep, and it takes all walks of life, all interests. It was really funny when I was on the East Coast. This is kind of at the other end of the spectrum, I think. I went to an overlanding event, and it was like a challenge thing, and they had all these obstacles kind of laid out, and I went as media, and so I wasn't on a team, and so I could bounce around between the different areas. But I grew up, rock crawling and running hard trails in Colorado. So at first there was some apprehension with the event organizers to just let me run around Vermont and tackle some of these trails on my own. I said, no, I'll be fine. And sure enough, I managed to plow through all the most difficult obstacles on the first attempt, and just having that driving finesse and the familiarity with my vehicle, it allowed me to have a lot more fun, and just have a lot more flexibility getting around. Whereas everybody there, even though they were driving everything from brand spanking new Toyota 4Runners up to like a Unimog. Just a wide range of different kind of vehicles, tackling the similar terrain, but such a wide range of experience that it really allowed everybody to have a challenge and have a good time. And I suspect the same things similar with the side-by-side world. People are buying straight into extremely capable vehicles, where the limiting factor is probably the driver, not the vehicle.
Yeah, and I don't want to beat on this dead horse too much, but unfortunately, that's kind of a crutch in my discipline and in my world, is that people are going out and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but people are going out and financing these side by sides, and with them financing that and making their payment, there's no crash course for them. Literally crash course for them to learn, to drive with the finesse and to learn how to drive safely and to learn how to yield to others. And unfortunately, like I said, they're becoming so popular that it's actually sending a lot of red flags to the BLM or the land management groups or insurance companies, stuff like that. And part of me always thinks, the jeeping world or the overlanding world, or the stuff that the rock crawling world, it's a little bit more of a controlled environment, because if someone really wants to do that, most of the time they've got to maintain their own vehicle. Most of the time they have to build their own vehicle, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think we both experience the same things. I see a lot of people buying straight into the fact that I see a 2018 Jeep JL Wrangler Unlimited that's already been lifted and got bumpers put on it, and somebody, I can tell they're not very comfortable with that vehicle. So even right off the bat, they've got $60,000, $70,000 in this vehicle, and they have no idea what they're doing. So, whenever I go into dealerships just to, drool on the eye candy vehicles, I always talk to the service guys and the salesman and said, hey, if somebody's buying these, make sure you direct them over to the Tread Lightly organization where, whoever buys these can get some education on it. I always say that the first upgrade that somebody should do to their vehicle is get some professional training. Like, you can spend all that money on lights and lockers and axles and tires and lifts and whatever, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're just wasting your money. So
definitely. And it's the only way they're going to be safer is to get that experience, unfortunately.
Yep.
And a lot of times they can get that experience on their own, but we all want to go out. We all want to have fun. We all want to drive as fast as possible or hit the craziest trails. And unfortunately, sometimes we get thrown in situations or put ourselves in situations where it's above our skill level.
Yeah, that's for sure. But, having at least experienced or talked to somebody with some experience really does a lot to help coach through that difficulty. Like just this last weekend, we went off-roading up in Big Bear, and there was a section of the trail where it was a large rock, a couple 100 pounds. It was on the trail, and a smaller vehicle would fit through, no problem. But, I'm driving a full-size truck down a Jeep-sized trail, and it took a little bit of finesse and rolling some boulders around to build a ramp and get up over that. And my wife was, she's been off-roading with me for a long time. We've been married since 2002, and she knows what I'm capable of, but this was her truck, and it's completely stock except for, the tires. So she was a little concerned about that, but we, pulled through it without a scratch, no problems. But if somebody else had done that without that same experience, we might have been reading about it on the news because it was either a steep drop-off to the side or somebody's going to have to back up a tight trail for quite some distance. So, yeah, I just recommend anybody, if you're not familiar with it, just don't let pride get the best of you. Get some training and get some experience from the professionals before you go out and just completely wad up what you just spent a bunch of money on. Or worse, get injured, and then that's even more difficult to recover from.
Well, and or injure your pride and then not want to be a part of it altogether.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people they go out and they either hurt their family or hurt someone around them, and then they're out of the scene altogether. They're picking new hobbies, whether it's, basket weaving or whatever. But we like to keep people in this community because it is a good community.
Absolutely.
So,
and we want everybody to have a good experience so that they can, get their family and friends involved and continue to have a good time. So
definitely.
Very cool. Kind of seems like we're wrapping up. So if somebody wants to find out, the Dirty Dooner Show, where should they go to subscribe and follow your desert antics?
So our biggest, outlets are obviously Apple Podcasts and Stitcher Radio. We have a website. It's dirtydoonershow.com, not the Dirty Dooner Show. I screwed up on that one. Just dirtydoonershow.com. Follow us on social media. What about you, and where can people go to listen and follow the 4x4 podcast?
Yeah, so the 4x4podcast.com has all the links to the social media and where to subscribe, but you can find us in iTunes and all the other places that people find podcasts. And I'm pretty active on Instagram lately. Facebook seems kind of stagnant. I don't know, the Facebook mafia is trying to extort money from everybody, so I really don't spend as much time there. Instagram was likely to go that same direction since they're owned by Facebook, but the interaction that I see on Instagram is really good. So that's kind of where I spend my social media time.
Yeah, and I, on that note, I bounce back and forth. I'll have weeks where I feel like it's a good Facebook week, and I'll have weeks where I feel like it's a good Instagram week. So
yeah,
follow the 4x4 podcast for the Dirty Dooner Show listeners. Obviously, we appreciate Dan coming on for this segment of our show and eventually on his show. But
well, sure.
We all want to work together, and hopefully we can get you out to the dunes or to a desert event or something. I've got some cool stuff in mind to involve you with. So
awesome. Well, if you ever get over here to the California area while I'm still here, maybe we can find some rock crawling and a different flavor of the desert. I still haven't been up to Death Valley yet, but the Mojave right now is my playground. I drive around in it all the time for work and on the weekends, so it's good times.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, let's wrap this thing up, and thanks, Dan.
Hey, you bet, Jake. We'll talk to you later. If you want to get in touch with us here at the show, there's a variety of ways to do so. You can email us at the4x4podcast@yahoo.com. You can join in on some of the great discussion on Facebook at facebook.com/the4x4podcast. To send a really short message, you can find us on Twitter at the4x4podcast. To be heard on the show, you can send us a voice message by using the SpeakPipe tool on the4x4podcast.com or on our Facebook page. Lastly, if you would like to monetarily support the show and help cover the website and media hosting fees, we have a few ways you can do that and get something in return. If you shop on Amazon, then go to the4x4podcast.com/Amazon and shop like you normally would. You can also go to the4x4podcast.com/support and pick up some stickers or use any of the affiliate links on that page. The most important way that you can support the show is by telling your friends about your favorite off-roading podcast. Now it's time to hit the trails, so God bless, tread lightly, and be safe out there while exploring your world.